Welcome to OJ Studios. Please enjoy this week's chapter of Bethany by Olivia Julius. Nathan's mom Rebecca watched her son through tear-soaked eyes, praying to God that her only son would be okay. Since her husband died a year ago, her Nathan has stepped up to become the man of the house. Now she feared that her son wouldn't make it. Right now, he stayed motionless on the bed. She stopped crying a little when she heard a knock on the door. She quietly gave a weak response, and a young police officer came into the room. He slowly walked to the doctor's stole and sat down on the other side of the bed. "Mrs. Reed, I'm Officer Thompson with the Shelby Police Department. I'm here to update you on our investigation," he said quietly. Rebecca nodded her head slowly, but she didn't dare to look away from her son. "We have arrested Tyler for what he has done to Nathan, and he's being held without bail, and trust me, his father swore he wouldn't get him out if there was." Rebecca nodded a little, making the officer a little bit uncomfortable. "Listen, Dr. Martin wants to come in. He's from the lab that developed the drug. He says it's urgent." Rebecca again nodded, and the officer left, thankfully that he didn't have to be there anymore. A bold man walked after the officer and stood at the bedside. He didn't say anything to Rebecca and instead started looking at Nathan and whispering to himself. Rebecca took notice and questionably stared at the strange man. "What are you doing?" she asked between sobs. Dr. Martin looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "I'm looking for any signs of a reaction," he said, turning back to Nathan. "What reaction?" Rebecca asked. She sucked in a breath, preparing for the worst. "It's classified. I have only been allowed to tell you if your son has it." Dr. Martin leaned over and checked both of Nathan's eyes. "Does he?" Rebecca asked, now more worried than ever. Dr. Martin kept looking at Nathan's eyes and finally asked, "What color eyes does your son have?" Rebecca looked in question but quickly answered, "He has blue eyes just like his father did," she replied. Dr. Martin gestured her to come over. She slowly walked to the other side of the table and leaned over to see that Nathan's eyes were no longer blue but a dark brown just like hers. "How is that possible?" she asked. Her heart thumped hard as she ran through the situation in her head. "I got one more test to check out before I know officially," he said. He grabbed the blanket and carefully moved the blanket down to Nathan's knees. "Can you pull up the gown?" Dr. Martin asked. Rebecca gave him a questionable look before raising it. Rebecca backed away when she saw it. She put her hands over her mouth to help her not to scream, but she felt like doing it anyways. Where her son's penis had sat, there was now a perfectly shaped growth slit. "I think he may have the worst case scenario," Dr. Martin said, looking up. Rebecca's mind spun in a whirlwind of disbelief and shock. Her son's transformation from a boy to a girl seemed surreal, like something out of a nightmare. She stumbled back, collapsing into a nearby chair as her thoughts raced. Dr. Martin's somber expression showed his understanding of the gravity of the situation. He cleared his throat, breaking the heavy silence that had settled over the room. "Mrs. Reed, what your son is experiencing is a rare and unprecedented reaction to the drug that was administered. It's a worst-case scenario we hadn't anticipated." Tears welled up in Rebecca's eyes once again as she struggled to process the information. She gazed at her child's unconscious form on the hospital bed, now seemingly altered beyond recognition. "Is there anything we can do to reverse this?" she managed to choke out, her voice cracking. Dr. Martin sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I wish I had better news, but given the nature of this reaction, we're in uncharted territory. We need to conduct further tests to fully understand what's happening at a cellular level. We'll do everything we can to find a solution, but it's going to take time." Rebecca nodded, her heart heavy with a mix of grief, fear, and a fierce determination to do whatever it took to help her child. "Please, Dr. Martin, do whatever you can. Nathan, my child, they deserve a chance to live a normal life. We'll work around the clock to gather more information," Dr. Martin assured her, placing a hand on her shoulder in a gesture of comfort. "I understand that this is an incredibly difficult situation for both of you." As the doctor left the room, Rebecca returned her attention to Nathan. She reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair away from their forehead, realizing that this was the same face she had kissed goodnight for years, the same child who had grown up before her eyes.